since. Oh, and just like the river I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die, 'cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. I go to the movie and I go downtown. Somebody keep telling me don't hang around. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. Then I go to my brother and I say, brother, help me please. But he winds up knocking me back down on my knees. Oh, there've been times that I thought I couldn't last for long, but now I think I'm able to carry on. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gon' come. Oh, yes it will. Washed all your clothes, we picked all your cotton and laid the railroad still, worked our hands to the bone. That's your lumber mill. I say, when will we be paid for the work we've done? When will we be paid for the work we've done? We fought in your wars in every land to keep this country free, all for women, children, and men. But anytime we ask for pay alone, that's when everything seemed to turn out wrong. We've been beat up, called names, shot down and stoned, and every time we do right, someone said wrong. When will we be paid for the work we've done? When will we be paid for the work we've done? We have given our sweat and all our tears. We've stumbled through this life for more than 300 years. We've been separated from a language we knew, stripped of our Well, you know it's true. Tell me now, when will we be paid for the work we've done? When will we be paid for the work we've done? Will we ever be proud of my country to be? When will we be paid? Will we ever say out loud, sweet land of liberty? When will we be paid for the work we've done? Somebody tell me, for the work we've done. Will we ever have peace and harmony? I want to know, will we ever be paid?
Welcome to Reparations 101 Political Education Briefing, brought to you by the Reparation Education Project
and Parable of the Sower Intentional Community Cooperative. So, Mama Nkechi, just what is reparations?
Reparations are forms of redress provided to those who have suffered human rights abuses or other forms of widespread systemic injustices, or to their descendants, usually in the aftermath of war, enslavement, or other forms of gross injustice.
What other elements of reparations does reparations include?
The formal acknowledgement of historic wrong in an official, unfettered apology. The recognition that the injury has continued past the enslavement era and still manifests today. Justice. Now you tell us some of the other elements of reparations.
The commitment to redress by culpable parties, including the federal government, which sanctioned the enslavement and subsequent segregation, and by the state and local governments, industries and corporate entities, academic and religious institutions, private estates, and other culpable entities, all of which enjoyed the unjust enrichment.
Yes, all of which enjoyed unjust enrichment. And reparations include the actual redress in whatever form or forms are agreed upon.
They stole us, they sold us, they owe us.
Yes, indeed. And just as moreover, what are the 5 internationally accepted principles for reparations?
Number 1, cessation, guarantees of non-repetition. 2, restitution. 3, compensation. 3, satisfaction. And 5, rehabilitation. Mama Nkechi, as an elder, tell us a little bit about the history of reparations movement in the United States.
Yes, well, 2 of the first formal records of petitions for reparations that were pursued and won came from formerly enslaved Black women, Belinda Sutton Royal and Henrietta Wood, who successfully sued their former enslavers' estates, Belinda in Massachusetts and Henrietta in Kentucky. At the end of the Civil War, newly freed Black leaders worked very closely with General Sherman in fashioning the concept of 40 acres, which he incorporated in his special field order number 15, only to have the reparations provision stripped by President Andrew Johnson. In 1898, Callie House and Isaiah Dickinson spearheaded the first mass-based reparations movement in the United States, the National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association, whose mission was to organize mutual aid for its members and to pass federal pension legislation that would compensate formerly enslaved persons. Callie House was wrongfully convicted and imprisoned for her grassroots organizing work. On the heels of House's movement was Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association during the early part of the 20th century, which also galvanized thousands of supporters. A Garvey follower, born in 1898 in Louisiana and later to be known as Queen Mother Audley Moore, championed the cause of reparations throughout the 20th century, perhaps being the most vocal Black nationalist and Pan-Africanist advocate for reparations during the 1950s and 60s. She was active in every major reparations movement until she became an ancestor in 1996 at the age of 97.
I have heard that Queen Mother Moore inspired people in both the civil rights and Black Power movements, including Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, James Foreman, and the Black Panther Party, the Republic of New Africa, and even more.
And it was these movements that inspired the Japanese Americans to unify their efforts, resulting in the 1988 passage of the Civil Liberties Act, which granted them reparations for their unjust incarceration during World War II.
So, Mama Nkechi, what comes next?
Well, we had the 1987 establishment of NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, who worked closely with Congressman John Conyers in formulating H.R. 40, the Federal Reparations Study Bill first introduced in 1988 and continues today under the leadership of Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. In 2014, we saw the publication of Ta-Nehisi Coates' article in the Atlantic magazine, The Case for Reparations, which galvanized a whole new generation to the issue of reparations. And in 2015, we saw the formation of NARC, the National African American Reparations Commission, comprised of professionals, and we saw the formation of the Reparation Education Project, a new organization with historic roots in the modern era of reparations activism. Senator Cory Booker introduced a Senate companion bill to H.R. 40 in the Senate. Land stolen from Bruce's Beach in California is returned to the descendants and reparations paid. It is revealed that Georgetown University stands today because of the enslaved peoples that were sold to keep the school financially stable. The city of Evanston, Illinois, used a reparations model to rectify housing redlining discrimination. The state of California established the first statewide reparations task force and held historic hearings.
And guess what's more? We have corporations such as Amalgamated Bank coming on board, and even Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream has issued a call for other corporations to support reparations.
Justice, bring the history down to today and tell us what happened in 2020 and its aftermath.
We saw the backlash from the Trump era, black books being banned. We saw the murder of George Floyd. There were demonstrations everywhere. 2020 candidates for the Democratic presidential nominations were vocal on the issues of reparations. We saw a whole slew of new organizations dedicated to reparations emerge, as well as interest from funders.
Reparations stakeholders include Black-led organizations,
Descendant advocacy groups,
allied organizations.
faith-based groups,
It's a global movement as well.
interest from funders,
Academics and lawyers.
and government and federal and state and local.
Justice, just what do you and your friends at Got Reparations and Parable the Sower intentional community feel when you hear the word reparations?
Inspired, connected, energized, grateful, fire, hope, comforted, fellowship, encouraged, hopeful, faithful, enraged, black-tastic. Mama Nkechi, when you hear the word reparations, what do you reflect on?
Liberation, redemption, give it back, redistribute, recompensate, humble, rebuild, solidarity, convergence, culture, empower, respect, amplify, progress, repair, leverage, dilemma, reimagine, unrestricted. Limitless, decolonized, promising.
250 years of slavery, 90 years of Jim Crow, 60 years of separate but equal, 35 years of state-sanctioned redlining, until we reckon with the compounding moral debts of our ancestors, America will never be whole.
Yes, that is indeed the case for reparations. Brothers and sisters, allies, and others, thank you for joining our Reparations 101 political education briefing.
Join the movement
for
reparations now.
It's time. It's time. I know it's time. The generation for reparation. Pay up, time to pay up. Reparation. Right now, reparations. Finally out, you know it's you. Pay up, time to pay up. Right now, reparations. Pay up, time to pay up. Yeah. Right now, reparations. Time for reparations. Right now, time for reparations. Time for reparations. Right now, time for reparations. Reparations for building this nation. Lynching and burning, castration. Selling children, family separation. Right now, time for reparations. Millions of slave ships landed, whipped, chained, and branded. 300 years of free labor. We ain't asking for no favor. Time to pay. Right now, time for reparations. Time for reparations. Right now, time for reparations. Pay up, time to pay up. Right now, reparations. Pay up, time to pay up. Right now, reparations. Reparations for reconstructions. Red summers of destruction. Segregation, Jim Crow, corruption. Right now, time for reparations. Reparations for the Constitution. Said we were 3/5 human. Reparations are overdue. 40 acres and some new. Time for reparations. Right now, time for reparations. Time for reparations. Right now, time for reparations. Pay up, time to pay up. Right now, reparations. Pay up, time to pay up. Right now, reparations. Time for reparations. Time for reparations. The generation for reparations. Pay up, time to pay up. Right now, reparations. Pay up, time to pay up. Right now, Right now, time for reparations. Time for reparations. Right now, time for reparations. Pay up, time to pay up. Right now, reparations. Pay up, time to pay up. Right now, reparations. Time for reparations. Right now, time for reparations. Time for reparations. Right now, time for reparations. Pay us, time to pay up. Right now, reparations. Pay us, time to pay up. Right now, reparations. Pay up.
Welcome to RMMM, the Reparations Movement Monthly Meetup. Not a meeting, not a strategy session, but simply a space for reparationists to come together to learn, get information, education, share information, and the like. So today is going to be a little bit different. We're in the holiday season, and this RMMM is not interactive. It's going to be totally taped, pre-recorded. But those of you who are on the Zoom, please feel free to put anything that you like in the chat. So it's going to consist of a pre-recording that I did for a program 2 years ago, December of 2021. talking about, of course, the issue of reparations, and it gives a kind of comprehensive background and history in the Nkechi Taifa style of the issue of reparations. So sit back and enjoy, and then join us next month, the last Tuesday in January, for our next Reparations Movement monthly meetup, which will be interactive. Peace and blessings to you all. Happy Kwanzaa, happy holidays, happy New Year. Habari gani. I am Nkechi Taifa, civil and human rights attorney, president of the Taifa Group LLC, director of the Reparations Education Project, founding member of NCOBA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, and commissioner, National African American Reparations Commission. I'm also the author of Black Power, Black Lawyer, My Audacious Quest for Justice, and the upcoming book, Reparations on Fire, How and Why It is Spreading Across America. So, today is the fourth day of Kwanzaa, Ujamaa Cooperative Economics, and it's also the date of my birth. Yep. So forgive me for not being present with you in a live capacity. But I really would like to thank you, James Rogers of NCOBA, for inviting me to speak, and thank you, Pan African Connections Bookstore, for hosting this discussion. Now, I'd like to start off with two tiny stories, parables, in fact. They're well-known Aesop's fables and will serve as a jumping off point to my talk. The first, the ant and the grasshopper. The ant worked all summer preparing for winter, while the grasshopper squanders his time in non-productive pursuits. And when winter comes, the hungry grasshopper comes to the ant begging for food, but is refused. The moral to the story is that behavior consisting of hard work and planning for the future is rewarded, while failure to do thus will have dire circumstances. The second fable involves a wolf and a crane. Now, a wolf gets a bone stuck in his throat and he sees a crane. Hello, Mr. Crane, with your long neck. I'll give you a reward if you use your long neck and remove the crane from my throat. I would be most grateful. The crane does so. And when she asked for payment, the wolf explained, you got to be kidding. Being permitted to remove your head from the jaws of a wolf ought to be compensation enough. So, what does this all have to do with reparations and economics and ujamaa? Everything. You see, Aesop's fables have morals, but this white supremacist settler state has demonstrated time and time again, most recently, January 6, 2021, that morals do not move them. So, while the moral of the ant and the grasshopper is that there should be reward for hard work and planning for the future, Black folk have not had the privilege of such reward. Rather, we have gotten the opposite: punishment, terrorized, traumatization. Black people have been terrorized and traumatized. Friends of Ida B. Wells in Memphis, Tennessee, worked hard and produced, but there was envy, economic envy, and were lynched. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black folk established Black Wall Street, 40 square blocks of Black businesses and churches and schools, and their hard work was bombed and burned to the ground. Black people worked hard in Elaine, Arkansas, trying to unionize to get better wages for their hard work, and they were viciously slaughtered. Black people literally worked themselves to death in Georgia's Chattahoochee Brick Company, which was nothing less than slavery by another name. Wilmington, North Carolina, the multiracial state legislature was railroaded out of office, out of town as a result of their hard work. Their houses and their businesses commandeered with the bloated bodies of those who stayed floating in the Red River. Black people worked to establish Bruce's Beach in California, a respite for resting place, okay, for Blacks banned from other resort areas, and it was snatched from them. And the list is endless. The casket is still being opened on these once buried examples of the hard work and economic ascendancy of Black people, only to have the dreams and aspirations that brought about the hard work and labor crushed because of white supremacist hatred and envy and the trauma that still flows through our veins. And to add insult to the injury, with respect to the second parable, white folk don't deem we are owed anything, that we should simply be grateful that we are still standing, or rather bowing down. And why do we, as cranes, keep sticking our necks in the wolf's throat, helping the state destroy us and our progeny? When are we going to work together in Ujamaa and help ourselves to build our own stores, shops, and other businesses, and to profit together from them, to be self-reliant, self-sufficient, self-sustaining, self-determining? This is what the Honorable Marcus Garvey sought to do. The UNIA's economic arm promoted the importance of economic independence. Garvey often said, quote, "A race that is solely dependent upon another for its economic existence sooner or later dies." He's the one that coined the expression "buy Black," urging his followers to patronize their own businesses. Garvey established the Negro Factories Corporation in 1919, which was capitalized at $1 million, offering stock to Blacks for $5 a share. The company planned to provide loans and executive or technical assistance to Blacks who needed help in establishing their own small businesses. The UNIA helped to develop a chain, not one, but a chain of grocery stores, cooperative grocery stores, a restaurant, a steam laundry, a tailor, a dressmaking shop, a millinery store, and publishing house. The UNIA initiated the Black Star Steamship Line, whose purpose, as he declared, was to serve as a commercial and spiritual tie among Blacks wherever its ships traveled. During 1919 and 1920, the UNIA grew spectacularly. As a result of Black disillusionment with the empty promises of America, Black folk responded by the thousands. So, what happened? Why doesn't all this exist today? COINTELPRO. The wolf snatched the neck off of the crane. The COINTELPRO, to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, and otherwise neutralize the activities of Black nationalist groups and their leadership, their spokespersons, their membership, and their supporters. Never, ever, never met. To be disseminated to the country at large. This represented, these thousands of pages represented a national coordinated program of war against Black people. So what, if anything, is owed to the descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States and the millions of those whose names and circumstances we will never know, who were sold or insured or raped, castrated, lynched, subjected to gynecological experiments devoid of anesthesia, convict leased, forcibly sterilized, laden with syphilis, subjected to redlining, neutralized by COINTELPRO, and imperiled to a mass incarceration unmatched in human history? What is owed if anything, to the descendants of the enslaved whose kidnappings and tortures and uncompensated labor helped to ensure the survival of colleges and universities and banks and corporations and industries and religious institutions and private estates, and yes, local, state, and federal government. Indeed, the issue of reparations for African descendant people in the US was once, in the not too distant past, unthinkable by mainstream America as viable public policy. Much as the information about the enslavement era and the role of culpable parties in general, much of this information has been buried for a very long time, just as the bombing of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma was buried, just as the massacres in Rosewood, Florida, and Lane, Arkansas, Wilmington, North Carolina, and countless others yet to be uncovered were buried, just as the reality of economic envy, as Professor Julianne Malveaux teaches us, couched as protecting the sanctity of the white woman, has been buried. But our history must not be buried. It must not be swept under the rug. And let's not get it twisted, y'all. It's not just the South that bore economic culpability. And we, the descendant victims, must not be the only ones to uncover and unpack it. Indeed, my white colleague, Katrina Brown, uncovered evidence that her New England ancestors were the largest slave trading family in US history. She documented her roots, that they brought over 10,000 Africans to the Americas in chain in her film, Traces of the Trade, a story from the deep north, not the deep south, y'all, from the deep north. She stressed that the slave trade was not just a few people taking a boat and sending it out. It was all about the money. Everyone in the town lived off of slavery, she said. The boat maker, the iron worker who made the shackles, the coopers who made the barrels to hold the rum, the distillers who took the molasses and the sugar and made it into the rum. Literally, the entire town was dependent on the slave trade. Wealth and privilege in the United States, she says, has been amassed in large measure as a direct or indirect consequence of the institution of slavery. Black folk have demanded repair from the beginning. Two of the first formal records of petitions for reparations that were pursued and won came from formerly incarcerated, formerly enslaved, same thing, Black women, Belinda Royal and Henrietta Wood. Then there was the pension movement seeking compensation for enslavement from federal agencies led by Callie House and Isaiah Dickerson. In the late 1800s, the ex-slave Mutual Bounty and Pension Association. There was the repatriation movement of Marcus Garvey in the 1920s. There was Queen Mother Audley Moore, who influenced so many people and movements. Yep, even Dr. Martin Luther King embraced the concept as well, not with just his coming to Washington to cash the check speech, but many more. 1968, the Black Panther Party listed the issue of reparations and restitution for slave labor as point number 3 of its 10-point program. And also in 1968 was the establishment of the provisional government of the Republic of New Africa, which in its Declaration of Independence stated that we claim no rights from the United States other than those rights belonging to human beings anywhere in the world. And these include the right to damages, reparations due us for the grievous injuries sustained by our ancestors and ourselves by reason of United States lawlessness. 1969, civil rights activist James Foreman's Black Manifesto included a demand that white churches and synagogues pay $500 billion in initial reparations to Blacks in the US. In 1972, the National Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana, adopted the Republic of New Africa's anti-depression program, an act authorizing the payment of a sum of money in reparations for its slavery and a negotiating committee between representatives of the United States and the Republic of New Africa to determine the kind, the dates, and other details of paying reparations. The Nation of Islam has historically called for reparations. Indeed, every single movement that was involved with Black power or Pan-Africanism included the information and the issue of reparations in some way, shape, form, or fashion. The African People's Socialist Party with their African National Reparations Organization, the National Black United Front, Dorothy Lewis's Black Reparations Commission, the Black Radical Congress, the December 12th Movement, and more. But it was the end of the 20th century, y'all. I get choked up. That I say brought about the modern era of the reparations movement with the 1987 founding of NCOBA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. NCOBA was founded to build a mass-based movement for reparations in the United States. And since its creation, the call for reparations has substantially leaped forward, generating this modern day reparations movement. After the turn of the century, we had Ta-Nehisi Coates' article in the Atlantic magazine, The Case for Reparations, which thrust the issue of reparations on the coffee tables and those magazine racks and doctor and dentist offices and in the mainstream press. In 2015, we had the establishment of NARC, the National African American Reparations Commission, comprised of eminent Black leaders from the legal, academic, health, and faith-based communities across the country. And today there is the movement for Black lives with their reparations platform and many, so many countless more. There is a lot of focus today on government commissions and accountability. But it is important to note that reparation advocates have also challenged corporations who benefited from the profits made in the trafficking of human beings. Countless companies and industries were enriched because of the enslavement era. There are companies that sold life insurance policies on the lives of enslaved persons, such as Aetna, New York Life, AIG. Gains were made by financial giants, JP Morgan Chase, Manhattan Bank, Fleet, Boston Financial Group, Bank of America, and more. Others with documented ties to enslavement included railroads, Norfolk Southern, CSX, Union Pacific, Canadian National. Newspaper publishers that assisted in the capture of runaway slaves included Knight Rider, Tribune, EW Scripps, Gannett. Financial backers of many of the country's top universities, including just about every Ivy League university, were wealthy slave owners. Today, the spirit of reparations, of redress, of repair is sweeping across the country. The U.S. Conference of Mayors has endorsed reparations, along with Amalgamated Bank, the Players Coalition of professional athletes, coaches, and owners across leagues, even Ben & Jerry's ice cream. The state of California has established a reparations commission patterned off of the federal bill, H.R. 40. The state of New York passed in its assembly a reparations commission. The next step there is the New York Senate. The city of Evanston, Illinois has earmarked monies from its legal cannabis industry to fund reparation initiatives. The city of Chicago passed a reparations ordinance for victims of police torture, and jurisdictions across the country are passing laws to examine the history of the enslavement and its vestiges in their own backyards. The cities of Asheville, North Carolina, Providence, Rhode Island, Amherst, Massachusetts, Seattle, Washington, St. Louis, Missouri, Burlington, Vermont, St. Paul, Minnesota, Chicago, Illinois, and more have passed bills instituting reparations task forces to look inside their own backyards, opening up their own caskets to their direct and indirect complicities. Slavery disclosure ordinances have been enacted in 16 jurisdictions, revealing historical ties to the enslavement era from financial institutions. Meanwhile, The Virginia and Princeton theological seminaries have made their mark. Dioceses of the Episcopal Church in several jurisdictions have committed monies as a moral statement of the church's historic complicity. Georgetown University and the Jesuits have pledged $100 million, and 20 states, including the District of Columbia, have passed or are considering passing resolutions to declare racism a public health crisis. None of the state and city actions, however, none of it, must let the federal government off the hook for its roles. HR 40 now has more co-sponsors than ever in its over 30-year history. Prior to Congressman Conya's retirement, the bill was changed from a study bill to a remedy to not only study, but also to develop reparation proposals for consideration. Yes, the federal government is not to be let off the hook, and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas is making sure that the issue is kept front and center in the Congress of the United States. The federal government is critical. Why? Because we must remember and never forget the origins of the Black nation in the United States. We are the descendants of Africans kidnapped and transported to the United States with the explicit complicity of the United States government and every single arm of the United States lawmaking and law enforcing machinery, US federal law, state law, high court decisions, lower court decisions, the dehumanization, the atrocities, and the terrorism of our enslavement in the United States were not isolated occurrences, but they were a matter of war. War conducted under the specific authority of the United States Constitution. The kidnapping was a wrongful act for which our ancestors and we as the heirs are entitled to reparations. The enslavement was a wrongful act for which our ancestors and we as the heirs are entitled to damages. The stealing of our labor was a wrongful act, as was the genocide we are still suffering. We are entitled to damages, to reparations, to reparatory justice. The compensations we speak of are owed to us. We are in a state of war, y'all. And be wary of being disillusioned that the wolf wants you as part of his or her family. The fact is, I studied at the feet of Queen Mother Audley Moore, Imari Abubakari Obadeli, and Chokwe Lumumba. And the fact is, as I learned from them, that the United States is not a nation, but an empire consisting of a white imperialistic settler nation and state and various non-white colonized nations. Today, this white state misrepresents itself as one nation, denies the existence of colonized nations it holds captive. Now, you and I may or may not agree with that basic message. There are so many messages out there concerning the nature of our struggle, and how we interpret those messages relate directly back to how we analyze and interpret history, which is nothing more than a story agreed upon. Thus, if I'm completely inundated with the message that I am a citizen of the United States, that I must continuously stick my neck into the throat of the the wolf, excuse me, then no matter how much the wolf hates me or oppresses me or threatens me or takes away my voting rights or doesn't let me teach what I need to teach in schools, then I would not even seek to have international laws applied to me. If I buy the message that the wolf, in the form of local state police forces and the United States military forces, if I buy the message that that wolf is protecting me, I will not seek to protect myself. If I buy the message that the wolf's educational system is sufficient for my children, I will not act to change it. If I buy the message that history began with the wolf, then my institutions will all reflect my sense of that fantasy. And if I buy the message that my hard work is sufficient and that there is no war against me, I will not be prepared for the backlash. So how do we build and develop in this environment? How do we practice Ujamaa? It is incumbent that we understand that the reparations redress is not for the enslavement era alone. Reparations are owed for what happened after enslavement and what is still happening today. So, my brothers and sisters, when we see the video of the ruthless pursuit, chasing, and blatant gunning down of Walter Scott in South Carolina and Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia like runaway slaves, when we see the gunning down of Michael Brown and Ferguson like a dog in the streets, when we see Breonna Taylor gunned down in her own bed, Eric Garner and George Floyd being choked to death, bullets pummeled into the back of Rayshard Brooks, Dante Wright murdered with his arms in the air, and the countless others, all by those who have been sworn to uphold the law, we know that there is a connection between the U.S. criminal punishment system and the necessity for reparatory justice. When we hear about the brutal gynecological experiments on enslaved women devoid of anesthesia that led to modern medicine, when we hear about the disproportionate coronavirus deaths of Black people due to their underlying health problems of diabetes and hypertension, obesity, we know there is a connection between the disparities in the healthcare system and the necessity for reparatory justice. When we see that prison beds are constructed based on the test scores of little Black boys in the third grade, we know that there is a connection between the educational system and the necessity for reparatory justice. There is a connection between the lack of economic opportunity and the necessity for reparatory justice. There is a connection between post-traumatic slavery syndrome and transgenerational epigenetic inheritance and the necessity for reparatory justice. There is a connection. And each and every harm must be compensated. And it is past time that the United States reckon with its racist, genocidal, and sordid past. You see, the Republic of New Africa's Brother Imari Obadeli explains that they didn't care if we flew the red, black, and green flag and sang freedom songs. They didn't care if we marched and demonstrated. They really didn't care if we called them honkies and pigs and devils or wolves, as long as we didn't talk about creating the answer to Marcus Garvey's probing questions during the 1920s of where is the Black man's government? His king and kingdom, his president, his army, his navy, his men and women of big affairs. As long as we didn't talk about creating a government, an independent government to lead the political life of the Black nation, as long as we didn't talk about an economic infrastructure to solidify this Black nation, as long as we didn't talk about an army to defend that government, as long as we didn't talk about reparations. You see, Brother Imari continued, they didn't care if we went back to Africa, as long as we did not mind just jumping into the ocean and swimming naked. As long as the issue would not be raised about a comprehensive system of reparations to seek to restore some of the African personality that they systematically sought to destroy, as long as we did not internationalize our struggle, as long as we did not mobilize for resistance like Gangazumbi or Palmares, we could talk. We could talk about self-defense. But as long as we didn't go about masterminding armed insurrections inside the belly of the beast, like Demar Beasley, as long as we didn't talk about it, work towards the mobilization of generations, as long as we did not historically analyze the necessary science of nation building, as long as we didn't connect the dots between the struggles of yesteryear and the struggles of today. Although today we celebrate Ujamaa, cooperative economics, to build and maintain our own stores, shops, and other businesses, and to profit together from them. It is pertinent to understand, though, that reparations is not solely an economic concept. It is a political concept as well, and a cultural one. Reparations is not limited to stolen labor. It's not just closing the Black-white wealth gap, but it is also for unjust war and cultural aggression as well. The political essence of enslavement is founded, yes, in the economic exploitation of our labor, but also in the illegal imposition of US jurisdiction on the enslaved and her descendants. It can never be overemphasized that Black people are on this soil as the result of warfare supported by the United States and other nations, and are here as a result of a vicious colonization, cultural and physical rape, and economic exploitation under chattel and mental bondage and terror. And the full ramifications of this historical record must not be endlessly ignored. I recently spoke on the issue of reparations before the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, which had recently issued a resolution in support of HR 40, the federal reparations bill. And I told them that there was one thing I learned from the Jewish experience. I said, nah, it was not the more than $70 billion in reparations the German government paid to the more than 800,000 Holocaust survivors, or the $7 billion that Germany agreed to give to the state of Israel. No. What it was the concept of transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. It was the study that was done of third-generation Holocaust survivors whose researchers found that they had inherited genes that had been transformed as a result of their ancestors' trauma and were becoming more susceptible to anxiety and other disorders. It was found that the trauma from the Holocaust traveled in their genes, and it was transmitted intergenerationally. And I began to think, Black folk have inherited centuries of trauma as a result of not only the enslavement era, but also everything else. If the Jewish Holocaust caused immense emotional, physical, and psychological effects intense enough to cause trauma to survivors, then what is the impact on living Black people today? Due to the abject horrors and brutality, trauma, and terrorism of the enslavement itself, the kidnappings, the force-free labor, the stealing of our languages and culture, the rapes, the breedings, the dismemberments, the brutality, the inhumanity of the Black codes, the convict lease labor and peonage systems, the chain gangs, the sharecropping, the lynchings, the harms of the Jim Crow apartheid, the denial of the benefits of the Homestead Act or the GI Bill, the gerrymandering, the redlining, the educational inequities, the health disparities, the mass incarceration, and more. And all of this for 400 years, or however one wishes to measure the time. All of it still exists in the collective genes of Black people in this country. Thank you, Nkechi Taifa, for your recently released excellent report. The harm is in our genes. We all stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. Although the present generation of whites may be innocent of what their forefathers and their foremothers did, as a people, they stand in a privileged position because of the actions of their predecessors. Each generation passes its debts as well as its assets on to the next generation. The heritage which whites enjoy in this country is what has been called white skin privilege. They benefit from a society and economic structure that is governed by white supremacy. And although we may debate methods of operationalizing this data for measurement, there is no question that Caucasians in this country enjoy the fruits of 400 years of unjust enrichment as a result of the stolen labor of African people. They stole us, they sold us, they owe us. There is no statute of limitations. There is no statute of limitations on redressing human rights violations. And debts are neither absolved nor diminished by the passage of time. In fact, over time, debts grow larger with interest. Y'all know about that, those school loans. Finally, despite what you have been inundated with, reparations, again, is not just about money. A check here today, gone tomorrow. Reparations is also about making repairs, mental repairs, psychological repairs, cultural repairs, organizational repairs, social repairs, institutional repairs, technological repairs, economic repairs, political repairs, educational repairs, justice system repairs, health repairs, and the list goes on. Indeed, in the spirit of Jama'ah, a reparations settlement can come in as many forms as necessary to equitably address the many forms of injury sustained from chattel slavery and its continued vestiges, its living legacies. The harms were multifaceted. Thus, the remedy must be as well. The material forms reparations can take, yes, indeed, can include cash payments, but also land. Malcolm, land is the basis of all freedom and independence. Brother Imari, the struggle is for land, free to land. Okay, so cash payments, land, economic development, repatriation, resources. Other forms of reparations can include funds for scholarship and community development, creation of multimedia depictions of the history of African Americans, textbooks for educational institutions that tell history from the African descendants' perspective, development of historical monuments and museums, the return of artifacts and art to appropriate people or institutions, the exoneration of political prisoners, the elimination of unjust laws and practices. Our ancestors would turn over in their graves if they felt that we were still sticking our necks in the throats of the wolves, if they felt that we were complacent with the status quo and failed to pick up their baton and struggle against the living legacies of the enslavement era. Let us not be sidetracked with the failed fable about the ant and the grasshopper and hard work. Yeah, we must work hard, but coupled with a knowledge of history and the practice of self-defense, because they're gonna come after us, because they envy whenever we achieve economic ascendancy. We must not forget the story of the crane and ensure that never again will we be caught with our neck down the throat of the wolf. What we call for, what we demand, what we must have is reparations now in our lifetime. Happy Kwanzaa.